And there you go.
Fantastic. Well, Darius, do you want to share the slides real quick and we can get the conversation started? And while he's doing that, just really appreciate the time this afternoon. We're excited to be here. It's a good conversation. I think we're all in the same, industry from a compliance and regulatory perspective, and I think we're all dealing with the same challenges. So I think our conversation today will be hopefully relevant, and we're definitely open to questions. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself while we're getting things started, just to be efficient with time. My name is Ryan Boggs. I'm a managing director in our technology advisory practice with Dixon Hughes Goodman. I'm actually been with the firm 13 years. Started as an intern, kind of worked my way up. So it's always fun to kind of just showcase what we see in the industry, and that's really going to be our perspective today. So happy to go into more detail. One thing that we do on a daily basis is really go out to the field and audit clients, and I think that perspective is pretty unique in that a lot of our clients are really struggling with access control, and I think the combination of Darius' perspective on identity access management is really going to be impactful. So Darius, I'll let you maybe chime in on an introduction.
Absolutely, guys. My name is Darius Radford with SecureIT. I have been in information security for well over, embarrassingly enough, 20 years. And I have seen quite a few challenges in my day, if you will. And so I'm really excited. I've done everything from obviously IAM work, application security. I've spent some time being a PCI auditor. And so I think between all that, it gives both myself, Ryan, and myself a really unique perspective that we're excited to be sharing with you.
Yeah, and so I'll just introduce Dixon Hughes Goodman. If you haven't heard of DHG, we're really probably predominantly located in the Carolinas. So really in your backyard. I'm based in Greenville, South Carolina, but you can see kind of our client footprint across the Southeast. We're about probably 17th in the country from an audit and tax and advisory perspective. Have about 2,500 individuals supporting clients across the United States, internationally as well. And so, our practice, the technology advisory practice, we work within, I would say, major industries is kind of our focal point. We really do go to market as industry expertise. Most of our clients are in the regulatory space. So you can imagine healthcare, financial institutions, some manufacturing, distribution, insurance, as well as some evolving technology clients as well. And so that perspective, I think, really opens up our eyes. Probably every day we learn something new about how clients are managing access, how they're maybe struggling with that as well, and really just trying to bring solutions to them from an audit perspective and advisory perspective to really help them mitigate those deficiencies. And so just a little bit of background about our firm. I'm sure most of you maybe have heard of us or seen us in the Triad area, but I'll turn it to Darius here to introduce SecureIT.
Next, we are SecureIT. We have been around a little bit over 20 years. We are currently in both the US and the Netherlands. Our areas, we specialize in retail, healthcare, as well as government and some financial. All we do at SecureIT is IAM. Services, advisory services, professional services, that's our specialty. We eat, live, sleep, and breathe IAM. That is what we do, and that is who we are. Thank you.
So when we were kind of preparing for this conversation, we really wanted to level set with this group, and I'm kind of hearing some of the backstory of even today's conversation from a security and privacy perspective. as we thought about where all of the pressure is coming from, whether that be a regulator or maybe a framework that we're dealing with, we wanted to kind of level set on at least what we're seeing a lot of our clients struggle with. And, this slide, I think, does a decent job of at least reflecting on what are those frameworks that, our clients are really maybe trying to adhere to, maybe they have to report on. And so, if we kind of go through this circle here and talk about what are the challenges that each framework brings, I think it becomes pretty obvious that access control is really a challenge. And it's not going to go away with the evolving technology that we're seeing. It's going to continue to be a challenge. I think COVID presented some unique challenges for moving everyone to remote. We've obviously been in this remote environment for a number of, going on 2 years now. And that's just compounded, the challenges that we've seen. So just want to go through this list and just kind of recognize, and really point to what we're seeing as the challenges. So from a Sarbanes-Oxley perspective, if you're a public client or a public company, you've obviously been dealing with Sarbanes-Oxley compliance for a number of years, and access control is so crucial to your financial auditor. And so that's always been a focal point from an IT perspective. And so we can, consistently look at access when we go to market and look at, hey, client, we want to audit you from a financial audit perspective, but there's an access control on the IT side that we want to make sure that you're getting that right. And we want to make sure that those controls are effective. And that can be as simple as, logical access of onboarding a team member to revocation, and really getting into, are the system administrators or are the segregation of duties in place? And so that's just been a unique challenge for an auditor to do that efficiently, and also to really not force the client to really, provide report after report. So that's always been a challenge. Kind of pivoting to HIPAA, if you're in the healthcare space, access control is critical. We've seen that over the number of years that as healthcare has tried to catch up from a technology perspective, they've really been challenged with a lot of access control issues as well, whether that be single sign-on or that might be multi-factor to protect medical records in more detail. And so that's been a challenge. And then ISO 27001 and 2, that's really presented, an international framework. So again, another organizational initiative to get access right. And so making sure that that ISO auditor coming in from a stage 1, stage 2 audit perspective can look at access control and feel confident that those controls are in place. Something fairly new is HITRUST and CMMC. So HITRUST on the healthcare side, another framework, another certification that organizations are now trying to deal with. And there are domains in HITRUST that are specific to access control, and they get into a lot of detail about policy and process and implementation of those controls. And so CMMC, level 1 controls, this is a government contracting requirement that we're really seeing this be another layer of complexity when it comes to access control. PCI requirement 7, if you're a payment card industry processor, if you have to comply with that, as Darius said, his PCI background, this really does kind of focus on access control. And then the last two, SOC reporting, so that old SAS 70, SSAE 16, now SSAE 18. Access control has always been a focal point there to make sure that if you're an organization that wants to report on controls and get a SOC report out into your clients, that you want to make sure you have good access controls and you can prove that to an auditor and issue that unqualified opinion. And then the last one, FFIEC, this is for the financial institution, it's examination council. So making sure there's an information security booklet that goes through a ton of access controls that says you got to have these to be compliant with that organizational requirement. And so if we take a step back, went through a lot of that in really quick detail. And I think the overarching comment there is that access control is just so important from an auditor's perspective. And if you're a client and you're getting audited, or if you have to respond to a regulator, you want to do that in the most efficient way possible. You want to make sure that you can produce evidence timely, and you can provide that to that examiner, that auditor, that regulator, without causing a disruption in operations. And so just wanted to level set with that conversation. So Darius, if you want to flip to the next slide, and I know Darius, the bottom right here, that presentation button, that might help us just see the screen better if you want to select that. But we think about access control. We want to break it down in probably 4 different buckets. And Darius, it's right there. There you go. Perfect. That should hopefully work. Fantastic. So if you can see, from an audit perspective, we really want to focus on 4 different buckets when it comes to control testing. And so this is the auditor point of view. And so when we're looking at, is a client doing this well, we want to make sure that they're provisioning access the right way, that they're performing access reviews, typically on an annual basis, but sometimes sometimes as frequent as quarterly, that they have privileged access nailed down, and that's their segregation of duties there. And then revocation, making sure that when an employee leaves the organization, that access is revoked timely. And so when I was preparing for this conversation, I really wanted to make sure that we talked about some issues that we've seen in these 4 areas. If you've been in IT for a while, that if you look at some of the deficiencies that we've seen across the board, I would say the most deficiencies that we see from an audit perspective fall into access reviews, privileged access, and revocation. Not saying that provisioning is not a challenge, but most of the time our clients can figure that out fairly quickly. They can obviously add employees to systems, and typically they're doing that hopefully on a role-based access perspective. When it comes to access reviews, this is a pretty foreign concept to our clients when it comes to a new client. So if they've never been audited before, they've never had to go through a regulatory compliance assessment, this concept of looking at access and taking a step back and confirming, does Jane and John, do they have the right access based off their job roles? And are we kind of confirming that on an annual basis? And then are we documenting that review consistently? And then, so that's a really big challenge for our clients, and it's a pretty foreign concept. So how do you do that efficiently without pulling the report and going through manually and checking a box? So is there a tool or a concept out there that we can use to leverage that? Privileged access is getting better, but it's still a challenge because there's always that situation that we see from an audit perspective that says, hey, we added a system. Maybe we converted from one system to the next, and we had to add administrators to do that, but we forgot to remove them. And so that's now a deficiency in our audit report. And so it's just looking at that continuously to make sure that privileged access is always front of mind, and that we segregate that access where we possibly can. And then, unfortunately, I would say revocation or terminated employees, it's such a, from our perspective as an auditor, it seems like a simple concept, and we know it's not. We know that every client is challenged with removing access timely and making sure that on a Friday at 5 p.m. if that employee is leaving, that we turn that access off as soon as we can, and we start to remove them from all the ancillary systems. And so that's always been, I would say, an easy finding for an auditor. And so how do we, again, systematically put something in place to remove that access with a one-stop click to really make IT more efficient? So that's really just some perspective, again, from an auditor's point of view. And so with that, Darius, if you want to flip over to the next slide, and real quick before you do, if you want to click on that display setting, you should be able to switch the view for the group here. Okay. Top left. And there you go. And then just There, swap the presenter view. Be perfect. There you go. Perfect.
Ah,
All right. So yeah, if you want to flip over to the next slide, we can continue.
One thing I wanted to add about this one though, is that if we look at the auditing overlay, one of the things that really strikes me are the different IAM solutions at each juncture. As Ryan mentioned, provisioning, access control, and revocation, these are typically functions that fall under a IGA solution, as they all have key components to user lifecycle management. Privilege access management, that's a big one, okay? In and of itself, which is why PAM solutions are so hot right now. Everyone is starting to realize that if your privileged accounts are secure, then you have probably mitigated your single biggest threat to your organization. Next slide.
So this slide, we wanted to kind of talk between the IAM point of view and the auditor's point of view, and really talk about implementation challenges. And so Darius, I know when we were talking and preparing, this has been I'd say a challenge. We've seen organizations. Let's just say that we come in and we issue a deficiency or even like a significant deficiency for a client, and it's a major finding, and it goes all the way up to the board. And the board, sees this for a number of years. A lot of times our clients are saying, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a solution to fix this. And typically they'll kind of end up, focusing on identity and access management solutions. But what we see is, if they don't do good planning, if they don't think about all the different components, then this is a ongoing issue. And it might be 4 or 5 years of continually reporting on that deficiency before they get it right. So I guess, Darius, would love to hear kind of your thoughts on what are things that people need to think about before they get too far down the path of IAM, and maybe some tips and tricks there for implementation.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up, Ryan. For example, with identity governance, one of the big things we talk about there is having a reference architecture. Identity governance is a solution that will touch all types of organizational resources, everything from applications to AD, to your SIM, to potentially even other IAM solutions. So it's really important to have a reference architecture in place so you can understand how it fits, not just in your enterprise today, but the future as well, okay? Cloud versus premise, understanding where identities are that you're looking to govern sounds like an obvious statement, but it's something that needs to be considered and thought about up front. Now, under PAM, one of the things that we've seen is with one of the big areas of the implementation challenges that we found is around identity, IAM maturity. In our experience, PAM is a type of solution that requires your organization be at a certain IAM maturity level before installing PAM. For example, if you a typical PAM use case would require an administrator to do some additional level of authentication in order to access certain data or to use a privileged account. That would typically require an administrator use multi-factor authentication or that the access control policy be in place. So in order to do step-up authentication for PAM, your multi-factor authentication system has to be in place. Ticket system integration. All right, so we just integrate a couple of APIs together and then we're off and running, right? Sorry, and PAM typically is not that simple, okay? So because of that, and because of how involved it is, it's very important to think about this up front, so you have to plan for it. Now, under access control, the big one is legacy applications, legacy applications, legacy applications, all right? what authentication protocols do they speak? Do they speak LDAP? Do they speak SAML, SAML 2.0? Okay, figuring that out can be a nightmare, but you have to sift through that. You have to figure all these things out up front, because that makes your implementation on the back end that much smoother. And then under federation, this one's really important too, because under federation, you have to understand how everyone authenticates, where they authenticate. And this also goes back to having a sound plan, and that term that we used earlier, having a reference architecture. This is an area that could strongly benefit from having a sound reference architecture as well.
Yeah, Darius, real quick, I wanted to add, one thing from an audit perspective is this is a project, right? I mean, this could be a year-long project to really get this set up and implemented. And it's great from an auditor's perspective to make sure that all of that's documented. It's a project, it has a defined, hopefully, start, and it's going to have an implementation date as well. And as that discovery is being made, documenting where those legacy applications might reside, what that federation looks like, that to me is almost gold from an auditor's point of view, because now we have a very clear picture, and we also understand what the entity is doing to remediate the issue. And we can kind of see that paper trail being built out. So just wanted to provide some food for thought. That project plan is really important to document during these types of implementations.
Great point, Ryan. Now on this next slide, what we wanted to do is just kind of cover some of the key or core IAM solutions out there. When we look at these, PAM, user provisioning, data governance, multi-factor authentication, access control, and identity governance, one of the things that jump out at us here is that a lot of these fall under the same head, if you will. Typically, under IGA or identity governance, you'll find functions of data governance. They'll also provide user provisioning, typically falls under an IGA type of solution and then also a lot of IGA vendors also provide access control solutions as well. But under access control is typically where you find your multi-factor authentication solutions as well. PAM, as we've talked about, is a beast in and of itself. PAM kind of stands alone, okay? Because as we know, securing those privileged user accounts, those service accounts, and learning to rotate them properly is huge when it comes to this solution. So this is just a little bit about the different IAM solutions out there. Next, as we look at these different IAM solutions, we kind of map them back to the different compliance drivers, okay? If you look at the PAM solution, mapping back to PCI, NERC, access control, mapping back to several of them, HIPAA, GDPR, SOX. If we look at SOX in particular, and some of those requirements under SOX that support IAM standards, some of those requirements they are providing centralized administration for managing user access rights and authentication. A big one in SOX is being able to enforce segregation of duties. That's a really big one. Also, adjusting access rights when someone's job function changing, or revoking user access upon termination are all things that we typically see under user provisioning. Then also managing access based on job roles and providing least privileges and limited privileges to privileged access accounts. We see that maps back over to PAM. So as we start going through different compliance requirements, we see clearly how IAM solutions are able to help solve for a lot of these complex drivers. Next, when we look at identity governance, data governance, and user provisioning, we'll see some of the compliance drivers that they then map back to. As Ryan mentioned earlier, FERPA and NERC are really big on who has access to what. Most of our compliance drivers, who has access, where is that access, and how is it managed, are the big issues that they're trying to solve. Implementation imperatives. As we look at IAM Solutions, one of the things we wanted to cover are some of the implementation imperatives that we see that we like to call out and to assure they get the proper consideration. For example, under identity governance, understanding the costs we found to be huge, okay? In order to work, an IGA program typically uses or needs advisory services on top of in-house resources. Application integration costs may get undercounted as well, as stakeholders fail to grasp the interconnected nature of IGA. For example, the IGA solution usually has the link with the HR management systems and so forth. Training costs can be high and typically higher than people predicting. And then finally, trying to find people with IGA skill sets can be a task in and of itself. So understanding those costs up front, we found to be very important. Also, build for the user experience. Oftentimes when, especially as techs, right, we get oftentimes caught up in the bells and whistles and we forget about our customer, the users, okay? An end user needs to feel comfortable or confident in the system, or the whole project can find itself in jeopardy. People just simply want to get their job done, and they generally don't have time or interest in learning new systems or lexicon. So if using a system isn't part of it isn't effortless and part of their day-to-day work lives, they typically find ways around it. Also a big deal is securing and sustaining C-level sponsorship. An IGA project is obviously challenging and they require collaboration across departments. As a result, having strong executive sponsorship is critical for the success and your ability to overcome potential points of friction. In my experience, one predictor that your project may be in trouble is when the executives stop coming to the status meetings. So secure and sustain C-level sponsorship. Now for PAM, one of the big things we see here is being able to discover all the service and privilege accounts, okay? This is typically a big one. So if you choose a PAM solution, make sure you talk to them about their discovery engine, okay? And all the different nuances of their discovery engine, what they're looking for, the types of data they're able to look for, things of that nature. Another big one in PAM, and I cannot stress this one enough, is please include your system administrators as soon as possible. From what I've seen, this can be one of your biggest roadblocks, okay? So getting them included is huge, okay? Most system administrators feel like this PAM solution just simply gets in their way and it just disrupts their job and just makes their job more difficult. Oftentimes, if you dig, they're probably already using some type of password vault and they think that's enough, okay? So it's very important to include them early and often. Another big reason to include them is that you want to hear their use cases. You want to make sure their use cases get included in the requirements. This also helps to ensure system administrator buy-in. So again, include your system administrators as soon as possible. Also, think through session recording use cases. We all love that feature in PAM, being able to record sessions, things of that nature, but it has a serious performance impact. So think through some of these things, think through that performance impact. Also plan for the storage of that data. Make sure you think about that. Now, under access control, one of the things that we see here is defining all roles and entitlements, okay? This can be a pretty big task, okay? And once you have defined all your roles and entitlements, deciding where to store them is also huge. Another big one is aligning with human resources. If you think about the process of onboarding, offboarding, and changing roles, that's typically very HR dependent. So it's going to be very important that you align yourselves with the HR department. And then finally, determining if these applications would be cloud or on-premise. That's going to play a big role in the type of access control solution that you need and the deployment of that access control solution. So think about all this up front, but this is definitely one that you want to consider as well.
Yeah, great stuff there, Darius. We thought we might end the conversation today with just kind of going through some case studies where we as auditors have seen the issue and really give Darius some time to kind of talk through where SecureIT and that team has come in and really helped a client resolve that issue. And so we'll kind of go through this list. I'd say at this point too, if you have questions, feel free to throw those in the chat. Would love to kind of go through any kind of food for thought from the audience here today. But Darius, whenever we go and audit a client, we always look at, okay, what does that new hire population look like? And then we typically pull a sample based off this, kind of an analysis of that population. And then we're really looking at, did that employee get provisioned the right way? And another way we might do that is we might look at the system, that access control list, and we would pull the new users to that system. And a lot of times, we see clients provision users based off the last employee's access. And we always scratch our head, say you can't do that. You got to provision them through role-based access. So I guess, from an IAM perspective, what can a client do to really resolve that provisioning deficiency from an audit perspective?
Absolutely. This is a big one that we see often. Typically, provisioning falls under your IGA solutions, okay? So there are a lot of IGA solutions out there, not a lot, but a couple that we like that are out there that do a really good job at helping automate some of the nuances around user provisioning, onboarding, offboarding, their changing of roles, and defining those roles, and as we mentioned earlier, having one centralized place to keep those entitlements that it can pull from is also really big here. So definitely IGA solutions help a lot there, Ryan.
Yeah, I think that goes right into access reviews really, really well. I mean, again, I think I mentioned earlier in the conversation, we go to new clients and we say, hey, we want you to look at access across the enterprise on an annual basis, and we want you to document that. And the looks that I've gotten over the years, and I'm saying, you're kidding me, right? We can't do that. There's no way that we have enough time in the week to sit down and look at everyone's access. And so that to me is one of those deficiencies that just comes up over and over because we recognize IT is busy, and IT really should be the facilitator of that and produce that report out to maybe a division or a line of business for them to review access. So I guess what sounds like IAM has got great solutions to help with that, but maybe anything else to add from an access review perspective?
Absolutely. Around access review, one of the big challenges that we see here is federation. Okay, where are my users? Are they in the cloud? Are they third party? Are they a remote vendor? okay? Being able to determine all of those different factors, where they fit and how that fits into your general program, as well as what do they need access to, and more importantly, how long. One of the areas that we really like there is being able to consider risk factors. Risk factors when being able to grant their access. Like, for example, if they log in from a coffee shop that does not have authenticated Wi-Fi, okay? That may, to your organization, be considered a risk. And to mitigate that risk, you may require step-up authentication. So this is definitely one of the areas I could see helping.
Yeah, and I know, Darius, you spoke a lot about PAM, privileged access management. Again, auditing privileged access is a challenge. You have to look at the different layers of the system, application administration, database, server, even down into the infrastructure side of that, and looking at the firewall admins and IDS admins. And so any thoughts there? I mean, I know there's solutions out there that've got to make this easier, right, for our clients to produce evidence, produce documentation, but also manage that access much closer than they may do just from a manual perspective.
Absolutely. As a past PCI auditor, one of the big things we used to go over was in requirements 7 and 8. In both of those, in 7 in particular, it was regarding limiting access to privileged accounts. And so you had to be able to prove who had access to those privileged accounts, which typically was a challenge because most people didn't even know where all the privileged accounts were in that network. So if we go back to something we talked about earlier, discovery, okay, and having a privilege, a PAM solution with a good discovery engine, okay. There's also freeware solutions out there which will allow you to detect unmanaged accounts, which is a really big threat as well. There's no reason to not know about unmanaged privilege accounts. So that's a big one as well, is really getting in and looking at those privileged accounts, understanding who has access to them, and then more importantly, logging that access, understanding what they did with those privileged accounts.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of our clients could benefit from that. Revocation, you mentioned it earlier, kind of in that provisioning conversation. One thing that we consistently see is the control language. Darius will say that user and all that ancillary access is revoked within 24 hours, for example. And when we ask clients, if that happened, or we look at evidence to try to audit that process, quickly becomes a challenge because they may turn off network access, but they don't remove access from those ancillary systems. And they always say, well, we'll get to that, but the risk is mitigated because the network access has been revoked. And we don't disagree with that. I think that's a good mitigating control. But I guess talk to me about how IAM might really solve that automation challenge, is moving away from manual to more of an automated revocation process.
I think you hit it right on the head, Ryan. Automation, automation, automation. Automating that user life cycle is huge. Typically, it also saves money as well. The quicker you can get your resources access to the right tools and applications at the right time, the quicker they can start producing for your organization. So absolutely, you hit it right on the head. Really digging in, understanding what these processes and procedures are. As I mentioned earlier, really working with HR to understanding the user lifecycle management process in its entirety, digging and working with them and figuring out how to automate that process is huge. Because when that auditor comes in, you hit it spot on. They're going to look at your revocation list, and they're going to look at current access, okay? And if anybody on that revocation list is on that current access list, that's going to be a flag. So it's really important to automate that to assure there's no loose ends out there.
That's right. Yep. So I guess last case study kind of comment here on change management. Really crucial in those organizations that develop an application. If they've got a code repository and there's true development going on, from an audit perspective, we're really trying to make sure that there's clear lines of segregation between development and then production, and maybe that QA role as well. And so I guess Darius, talk to us about how IAM might really position organizations to be, again, more automated in kind of that segregation, and to be able to report on that to an auditor.
Absolutely. Again, this sounds like another situation where IGA would help. One of the big things here is separation of duty. And that's one of the key tenets or key functions of an IGA solution is separation of duty. So absolutely, I think that a strong IGA solution would go a long way in helping you with this area.
Yeah, fantastic. It sounds like how do you push IAM to more of my clients to make everybody's life a little bit easier. So I really appreciate everyone's time today. We'll flip over to a question slide. And Evelyn, I'm not sure if we want to stop the recording just to give people some opportunity to ask